So my name is Gideon Moss. I'm currently the COO at FieldSwitch, and we work on a host of different renewable energy and carbon offset type of projects. And today I've actually opened up a conversation with a colleague of mine, Inka Hubert, who's a scientist and a specialist in this carbon industry, to actually try and demystify some of the things that are going on, in not just in the industry in South Africa, but I think globally and abroad, trying to see what the actual intent of carbon credits and renewable energy certificates, things we'll define in a moment, actually was, and actually see how this can be a value adding, not just to corporates, but to individuals as this market commences and grows into its full maturity.
Thanks. I'm glad to know that you want to hear my opinion. It's been a journey getting to understand where we are now, and there's obviously lots to learn. So no way am I the expert of the world, but I think we do have a lot to share. And also, as you say, it's like turning the information into something that the normal person can understand. You don't need a master's degree in engineering or science to understand what a carbon credit or renewable asset is. So I went to Stellenbosch University at the ripe age of 18 to study biotechnology because I truly believed that our food system and like a high-tech future was the way of the world through plants and microbes. It was really difficult. I ended up doing my honors in like the starch in moss, and something that seemed very abstract at the time, as university does feel sometimes.
Just quickly explain what biotechnology is.
Okay. Biotechnology is editing DNA. So that's where like GMOs come from, but also interesting things like certain medicines, or like yeast for beer is a biotech product. So there's all sorts of different, so yeast, you like select different strains of yeast to make the beer, or wine.
I did not know that.
So anything to do with a microbe or DNA or genetics is biotech. I was specifically in like plant biotech, but I have a background in genetics. And so I understand the world on like literally a molecular level.
Okay.
Which is quite different to where we are.
It's a difficult one to, it's an interesting one to view the world through.
Yeah, but it's good knowledge to have. I feel like I can understand the world from the bottom up. And obviously when it comes to like the cycles of the world and carbon cycles, that's all stuff that was a part of that. So after those beautiful years in Stellenbosch, it was COVID straight after.
Oh, wow.
So that was super awkward. And then I ended up working at Pathcare as a medical scientist during the pandemic. And that's where I fell out of love with working in a laboratory. After that, I ended up in Kenya, and I volunteered at a carbon coral restoration project. So it was really cool about that. I love the ocean, diving, snorkeling, scuba. So that was the main.
And you're a surfer?
And I can surf, not a surfer. But there, what was really cool is they would take this portion of like coral reef on the beach that's owned by or has been used for like thousands of years by local community for fishing, and it had been overfished with the population, and obviously there's boats that are like scraping the coral, and then a guy from England invested money to turn it into a carbon credit project. And this is where the first time I like understood what it meant, but not what it means, but how it actually is supposed to work and how the outcome.
So with it, you're referring to the concept of carbon credits, the value there of an actual carbon credit.
Green assets, like in general.
Yeah. How did you end up in Kenya?
My dad moved to Kenya.
Okay.
My stepmom lives there. So I had like a one-way ticket for a little adventure. And there, what was so cool is they take little baby corals and they replant them on these little man-made reefs, and eventually they grow. And so it's funded, the initial investment is by some investor in England, and then it becomes a circular system. So they can claim carbon credits because unless that investment and the carbon credits have been made, that would have been a dead zone. There would have been no fish. It would have had no value. But now what's happened is like the fish have come back. People actually pay to go snorkel there. The snorkeling is, you can be like waist deep and there's just octopuses and anemones and turtles.
Oh, wow. That
sounds
like awesome.
Insane. And now the community has like this sustainable tourism-based project. And the best thing is the fish had like increased by 1,000% in like 10 years, which is crazy.
It's a lot.
And the outskirts, so it almost became like a breeding ground. So this was like the little hub. And then all the outskirts and the other beaches started getting more populations because the babies had somewhere to like grow bigger. So that was like obviously that's like a dream, best case scenario thing ever. But it was a circular system, and now it's like a self-sustaining project, and this piece of beach or coral reef is protected when it wouldn't have been. And that is absorbing carbon. Coral reefs are also one of the biggest carbon absorbers. The ocean.
I didn't know that.
The ocean is the biggest carbon sink.
So how does that actually work? Like, is there microorganisms that live in the ocean that actually feed off the CO2?
So like trees, so algae or like kelp.
Yeah.
They absorb CO2 and like trees. So they're like the trees of the ocean, and there's so many of them. Something like a whale is like a carbon sink, because like you're made of carbon. If you biodegrade, your carbon now
goes back into that.
So whales are like also one of the biggest carbon sinks in the ocean.
That is so interesting.
Really interesting.
Okay, so wait, there's been a lot that's mentioned. So maybe let's take one quick step back before we jump into the detail of carbon credits.
Yes.
So you ended up in Kenya, which sounds like an awesome project. Were you able to snorkel there yourself?
Yeah, like every single day. That's the job. You like plant coral in the ocean. It's like planting trees, but underwater.
That's so cool.
I'll post a picture. You can share it.
And then how did you end up going from there to here? Because at the moment, you're also working in carbon consulting, looking at carbon credit projects and carbon strategy, scope 1 and 2 emission reductions for corporates. What was that journey like, running from there to here?
Didn't think I would be here, but it makes sense now. While I was in Kenya, I decided I need to learn more about this. Like, how am I going to do this and move away from this laboratory-based situation? I ended up doing a master's at UCT in environment, society, and sustainability. So that's like anyone could do it. So if you're from science or business, or you're a chef, obviously with the right qualifications, it's a course that just has this bigger picture. Lots of them won't go into the details of all the different subjects, but ended up working on like community-based conservation. So I was very passionate about the money and good things for the planet going back to the people who are actually the ones that make it happen.
Yeah, and supposed to benefit from it.
And supposed to benefit. From there, worked on various reports. So we did through my supervisor, Pippin, through UCT for the last few years, worked on nature-based solutions in cities in Africa. So urban nature-based solutions that publishing like in the next few weeks. And that was looking at nature-based solutions, which is how you use nature to create like greener cities and combat like floods and stormwater and droughts from climate change. So that's just finished, and then consulted on an EU report on like biodiversity and connection. So quite policy orientated things. And the biggest thing that came out of both of those projects, and I also did a carbon consulting project with JP and Delta Carbon a few years ago, was that financing in South Africa is like the biggest problem. It's the biggest bottleneck. We have so many resources. We have so many educated people. We have got so much, but unfortunately, as a developing country, it's difficult to unlock that. And then that linked in with, well, what else do we have a lot of? Okay, we have lots of energy resources. We have mines. We have lots of development happening. And although there's these little guys on the ground that need this carbon financing and good projects for their livelihoods, like what are the guys at the top doing? So these guys are small, and a lot of them will make a bigger picture, but how do you actually tap into like the big emitters and these goals that we're going to talk about, and like regulations? So that became very interesting to me on a corporate scale. So obviously when you're combating a problem, if you can combat like the top 20%, you're making an 80% difference versus like the smaller guys. And that's where this came from, like not like moving away from the community-based small scale nature thing. So nature-based projects is absorbing carbon. How do we actually like reduce that being emitted in the first place? So we don't have to do this.
I think that's such an important thing. So what I've been seeing in my short few years in this industry compared to you is that a lot of people see carbon management of your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions as like a grudge purchase, almost like insurance or your medical aid, where we now need to start reporting on this. And there's requirements coming in from shareholders, from industry, from clients that want us to start reporting on scope 1, 2 emissions. And we'll get into the definitions of each of those things in a moment as well. We have to do it, but we don't really understand it. It's kind of this abstract thing that in some cases, some companies get taxed on, so they need to do it for that purpose. But actually the goal was, hey, we're going to tax you because we want you to start changing your way of thinking. And if you don't change your way of thinking, you're going to keep thinking of it as a grudge expense. So I actually like the way you defining it. So maybe let's quickly jump into the definitions. So if we think about a carbon credit, what does that actually mean?
So carbon credit is what we label a ton of carbon dioxide that's either been removed, so physically through trees or a coral reef where it's actually absorbing it and it will stay there forever, or through some high-tech system that physically absorbs in the European countries, like absorbing carbon, or it can be reducing. So if you're looking at like a baseline scenario, you're showing, is this reducing what the baseline would be, which is where things like solar and renewable energy come in, where you'd say, in a normal case, look, we'd be using this many megawatts of electricity, and now because of this project, we've actually like reduced this below the baseline.
So baseline is, hey, we measure what our company is using today. Now we change the type of light bulbs we use, or the type of air conditioning we use, and now it's less. Under
certain, there's a whole bunch of rules that apply to what does reducing mean. Absorbing is a bit of a more clearer definition. Because you can physically, tangibly like see a tree grow and calculate that carbon. That wouldn't have happened. But with renewables, the baselines that's where methodologies and like carbon consultants come in, is actually figuring it out on a mathematical level.
So there's a way, when we were on honeymoon, me and my wife, we visited a farm that was busy putting down like spec boom by the millions to rehabilitate the ground. And I remember, the owner at that stage was saying he is hoping for carbon credit revenue to come in. And this was like 5.5 years ago. He was hoping for carbon credit revenue to come in. And he's been doing it by that time already for years. And then the carbon markets weren't as mature as they are today. That it actually supplement his ability to farm, because he stopped farming to rehabilitate the ground, because the one was damaging the other, or his way of farming and his ability to generate income. So how do you physically measure how much carbon is taken out of the atmosphere into, whether it's a kelp forest or a spec boom or a tree that's growing? Like, because you said that's the easier thing to do.
The absorption
one.
So that's not what I do, but I can tell you how they do it. When plants grow, there's like calculations where you can see the mass of something. There's like standard calcs that will be done, like a spec boom grows this much in this many years, and this is how much it weighs, and this is its carbon content. So it's a conservative calculation. So they would say, okay, there's a hectare of spec boom, this many plants per hectare, over this many years, this is much it absorbs. And obviously that's where like auditing and verification comes in, where someone physically checks, yes, there are 100 spec boom per
so it's not
whatever
just a
the area
desktop
is.
exercise.
No, when it comes to nature, they will physically check. It gets even more complicated when you start claiming carbon in the soil, because then they have to do like soil samples.
Before and after.
So they do a baseline. A baseline is, what is the scenario without this project and this carbon credit revenue? And it's the same for every carbon credit. What's the business as usual? And then you do samples for that. And then every few years, you're obviously sampling to see how the project's going. So there's lots of smart things they use. Like, I know someone who used, instead of physically going into a tree canopy to measure trees, they've now done research where they actually use a drone to measure the density, which takes away, and obviously AI now, which takes away this like manual labor of physically measuring trees and estimating. So it's getting pretty accurate.
Yeah, I'm actually quite excited to see where the whole AI in verification goes, because these carbon credit projects are like, the standard number I've been getting is like $1 million to register one.
Yeah, right? so admin intensive.
Yeah, and we've been spending months on some of these projects ourselves. So it's really not feasible to actually make a difference on the small scale, but it's like the community that needs to benefit, unless you've got a really big project. And as you mentioned, funding, typically from an external source, it needs to get pushed into this for it to grow.
Yeah, mangroves, great. It's like one of the biggest carbon credits. Or carbon sinks and biggest carbon credits in Africa along the coast.
Yeah.
And like there's a lot of money that goes into it, but the transformations you can see, and it's been a few years, is like really, really life-changing. Schools, hospitals, food. There's just so much good that can come out of it. And I guess that's why I'm doing this.
So let's speak about the philosophy around carbon credit projects. Like, why does this thing of a carbon credit actually exist, right? Because it's this, call it accounting mechanism that certifies every ton of CO2, but to like what end? Why did people come up with this? Why didn't they just make the difference, put the money into a project and it ends there?
I'll think of an example. So say you're like Google, I'm not going to name drop, some big Silicon Valley company. So there's all these agreements that were made. So like in the 1990s, like the Kyoto Protocol, which is where everyone agreed that we're going to reduce our emissions by some ratio to the baseline of 1990. So they looked at the 1990 emissions and they were like, okay, how do we like get back to this or within a certain range?
And these are like countries or companies or both?
No, these are like countries signed up to
Countries,
this.
okay.
But then you also get labeled as like an Annex 1, Annex 2 or developing. So depending where you are, developed countries have much stricter rules because they've already emitted so much. But a developing country is kind of like playing catch up.
Okay.
So it would be really unfair for South Africa to have the same rules as like China or the US because we just haven't been emitting as much for as long.
Okay.
So it's also helping developing countries become developed, not at the cost of all of their resources and the planet. So if you're a big emitter in America or wherever you are, you will now have to reach this goal. So you're allowed to emit this much a year. So if you're emitting 3 times that amount, it's not feasible in your business to go and like buy a forest and maintain the forest. Maybe you don't have enough roof space to actually reduce your energy so much that it became, what if I can buy this from someone else? So
it's like if I take the example locally, it's like a smelter, which uses a ridiculous amount of electricity, more than like communities or in some cases even some towns would. Like they can't put up enough solar to actually reduce the electricity from the grid. So it still has that carbon footprint. Okay, I get you.
Okay, so that's where it came from, is that some people need to reduce. They don't have the means to do that within their own entity. So now they're going to buy or essentially pay someone else to reduce for them.
Okay.
But that becomes complicated. So it's easier to just trade it in a credit. So you create a credit, I need it, I'll buy it. Instead of now a company has like 10 forestry projects that they're trying to manage on top of their business.
Yeah.
So it was supposed to become like an easy, efficient way of emitters to reduce their emissions and for companies who are essentially like doing good for the planet to actually make it a sustainable business to reduce carbon. And the whole point is to balance out eventually.
So this becomes a financing mechanism for these like do good actual carbon credit projects to make the difference. So if I take your coral reef example, without the funding that came from a investor, it wouldn't have been possible. So in this case, if you don't have an investor, you can kind of use the carbon credit future revenue to finance the project up front, right?
Yeah. And I think some governments are on board with it, but there's a big market for developed countries also have budgets for like giving to developing countries through various banks and initiatives. I think we work with some of them. There's certain people that have to donate. So that's also where like voluntary and involuntary comes in, where you either have to reduce your emissions legally, otherwise we're going to tax you or you're not allowed to operate anymore. And then you also get people, I heard about this the other day, so Taylor Swift bought carbon credits to offset her like tour's emissions.
Jet emissions.
So that's like, she didn't have to do that.
Yeah. No,
she did.
Tax implications, like I want to make a difference.
Yeah, she probably just felt bad about it, but no, maybe she should. But those are like the two, you either have to do it or you don't. And that's also where the different rules start to come into play on which side of the coin you sit on.
It's interesting if I think about the markets. So something that we know is coming into play beginning next year from the EU side is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, so CBAM. So it's a tax being implied on the supply chain of goods that are being imported into the EU. So to make sure that's green, because the requirements on the EU or first world countries, as you mentioned, are more stringent. So it's interesting for me to see is that the fact that that's only being implemented on certain industries at this stage.
Okay.
And then as years go along, the number of industries that are going to be included in that actually increases. So with the same thing with local carbon tax. So local carbon tax in South Africa is now focused on big emitters. And I mean, those are massive companies. And the small guy has never been included. So for most people, at least that I've spoken to, they didn't even know about this carbon tax thing, or it hasn't hit their pocket yet. So it hasn't been an issue for them. But that requirement's also becoming more inclusive for more and more businesses. So as this whole policy matures and as we move from developing to hopefully in the future we'll see more developed.
Hopefully.
Fingers crossed. The number of people needing to participate is growing so much, and the level of knowledge available to most of them, from what I've seen at least, is they're very actually undereducated on the topic.
Yeah. It's a new, like 15 years ago, this wasn't
there was
a thing.
nothing,
like
yeah.
You couldn't study it at university. You could, I think, like who we were speaking to at the conference had been in it since like somewhere in the 2000s or the early 2010s. But it's like hasn't had enough time to infiltrate into everywhere. And like we're at this point where we're at a very critical time to understanding it and doing the right thing and making sure it is sustainable. But the phased approach is that it would be really unfair if one day they were like, everyone has to reduce their carbon right now. So it's targeting the top 20. And then obviously as we're going to emit carbon anyway, so we need to find like a phased approach to get it down as a whole.
I've heard an interesting number last year. So we were in the EU, a part of a digital energy challenge that we were a participant in. And the EU has put a budget aside of over 300 million euros. And I think they're like in the middle of the term where that needs to be deployed to fight climate change. And that's anything from potentially carbon credit projects, who knows, to building dams and hydro facilities and solar farms. And they've actually been putting a lot of money and effort into assisting small-scale entrepreneurs, upskilling and upscaling throughout Africa and empowering them to make the difference.
Yes.
So not this like organization in the EU that comes into Africa to solve its problem, but the carbon credits are a nice mechanism with which this can be done. So we're seeing guys on the floor in many African countries, including our own, wanting to install solar to electrify the community, new businesses being started because of that, sense of dignity being restored to some of this community, there's safety numbers, that's becoming a lot more safer in the community. Industries are starting to grow from that, and the carbon credit revenue is something that can actually empower and accelerate that progress, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned something about verification. You've got different tools when it comes to these avoidance, and what was the other word you used? Reduction policies or standards.
Yeah.
So let's speak to the different registries just briefly. And then, I've heard there's multiple different registries. They've got multiple different types of tools. Like, why are there different ones? Maybe you can give some insight on that topic.
So there's lots of registries that do carbon credits. They differ on varying scales of what you can like use the credit for. So it's all about when you get that credit in the form of a certificate, is how reliable is that? And that becomes from the registry. I would say it's similar like a bank. Like they all offer the same thing in terms of they manage your money, but there's many of them. So carbon credits, not just one person that's doing it. There's multiple different registries. Examples are like Vera and the VCS standard, the gold standard. Those are two that we use for carbon tax in South Africa. So I think for this conversation, those are the most important. So those are what you'd use for like compliance markets. But if you're, as I say, Taylor Swift, you could technically Google carbon offset or carbon credit registries and buy from anywhere. Maybe, and they like can come from different places like glass recycling or composting and small scale things. I'm of the opinion that because the bigger registries that are carbon taxed are more intensive, they're also more expensive. And that means the bigger the projects and the more carbon that you're offsetting, those big projects end up in the big registries.
So these registries have different, call it internal standards of quality and rigorousness that they go through. And that's what adds on the one hand to the cost, but also to the validity in some of these models. That's why South Africa only looks at 2 of these registries, even though we have a local registry.
Yes.
Which is at the moment not included.
Yeah, there's lots of methods. There's loads of methodologies that you use depending on what technology. Technology is any way you offset carbon. And they also come with auditing rules. So every registry has different auditing requirements. And then there's auditors around the world who work with a certain registry, or maybe they work with multiple, but there's very strict guidelines of how a project is passed under the different registries. And As I said, some are a bit stricter than others. Some want to see like stakeholder engagement and community benefits and that the SDGs are being met. And some others just want to see that this carbon was reduced.
Yeah.
So if you buy like a Vera carbon credit, you can be very certain that there was stakeholders were engaged and that you're helping contribute to SDGs. If you buy from a local market, you can probably ask them what's been going on, but you don't have that same guarantee stamp of approval. And especially when it comes to the compliance markets, if you are claiming you're reducing carbon and we're adding this towards our goals and trying to reach net zero, then the more legitimate the credit is, the better for everyone that's involved.
Okay, so we touched on the regulated markets now through your Taylor Swift example. All credit to Tay. Why are there these things of voluntary and compliance markets? Like, what does that actually mean?
Okay, so it comes back to the Kyoto Agreement, the Paris agreements that the world's gone through, where we agreed to these rules that we need to meet these goals. And if you emit a certain amount, you fall into a category where you have to reduce to get to your amount. So say it's like 100,000 tons of carbon, don't quote me, a year. If you emit more than that, you're liable to offset it. However, if you want to do it internally, if you want to buy credits, but then there are certain credits that can be used to offset and to meet your compliance goals.
Okay.
But voluntary is like if we as a business want to say we are net zero. No one told us we have to, but it might look really nice on a website. It's a good thing to have in your marketing.
We actually care.
Yeah, you might care. I was thinking about, like, when you go, say you fly on a plane and it's like, do you want to offset your plane? That would be a voluntary. No one's forcing you to.
Yeah.
But it can be, I'm spending 20,000 Rand on a plane ticket. Let me add an extra 500 Rand to like offset my flight.
Okay, so if I'm mining company A and I am a big emitter in South Africa, then there's a compliance market.
Yeah.
So I need to comply. And in our case, there would be the carbon tax. So you got the whip, carrot and the whip, right?
Yeah.
So you got, you're going to get taxed if you for every ton of CO2 that you emit. There's a rate associated with that, and I have to comply. So I can reduce my CO2 that gets emitted into the atmosphere by using different technologies. I can change the type of light bulbs that I use. I can use electric vehicles versus whatever coal-fired mining trucks or massive engines. And whatever I can't do, like that small difference, whatever the difference is, that I can get the carbon credits for, right?
Yeah, okay, for your scope 1.
For my scope 1. Okay, so scope 1, per definition, is the CO2 that I emit into the atmosphere.
Yeah, that physically comes from your business operations.
Okay, so as a mine, there would be many.
Yeah.
And that's why as soon as I've done everything that I possibly can in this whatever reporting period, let's say 2025, 2026, and I've reduced my emissions baseline first, then I went from my baseline, reduced it, and then I can fill whatever the difference is up with carbon credits.
Or you can pay carbon tax and not pay for the credits.
Okay. So either the money is going to go to SARS or the money is going to go to a project that wants to make a difference.
Hopefully.
So it's like you have a choice there as a business. We can leave that up to whoever needs to make those choices. Typically, it's cheaper to buy the carbon credits in any ways. And you make a difference. So, okay, so that's the one side of it. Is compliance markets. Voluntary markets are companies that do not get taxed, or a component of the company that does get taxed, it's CO2 emissions. And this is now the scope 2 emissions, right? Typically. Well, in some companies' cases, it would be scope 1 as well.
But they're just not high enough emitters to fall into the category. Yeah, scope 2 emissions, you don't necessarily need to use carbon credits for. You can use like RECs.
RECs, yes. So renewable energy certificates.
Because scope 2 is stuff that is emissions that you're purchasing. So if I buy electricity from Eskom, that's my scope 2 because I'm not burning the fuel on my property. It's like measurable. Same thing if I like buy steam from next door, or there's lots of technical things to label them, but that is more of like the energy that you're consuming, not the emissions that you're producing.
So it's my indirect CO2 emitted into the atmosphere because of stuff that I'm using. Okay, so I use electricity, Eskom burns coal, and then...
But you paid for that electricity.
Yeah.
So if it was like they gave it to you, it would be there.
Issue.
It's a good question. Free electricity.
Okay, so that would be voluntary. So companies, whether it's scope 1 or scope 2, that are not in the compliance market, they would have the ability to voluntarily offset that by making the difference and paying the money for the carbon credits that would hopefully go back to the projects that is supposed to benefit from it.
Yeah.
And this can include any type of business. No business is limited from doing this, right? Whether it's the coffee shop around the corner or next door, or it's like large listed businesses,
Yeah.
all of them can participate.
Anyone you can, just by yourself.
Yeah, so I can offset my own like commuting to work and back.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so that's
cool.
good to understand. And that would be because they made these commitments. So companies typically make commitments by 2030, 2035, 2050, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's two. So they're either like forced to under law, which are these like climate change agreements, or as you say, a company could have a 2030 goal. So they're technically still voluntary, but their company has a goal, so it's not really.
Yeah.
So the lines are still very.
So it's not a tax liability.
No.
But internally, there's a commitment made to shareholders, and they have to make that.
Exactly. Okay. If you say we are a net zero mall, maybe you need to be net zero also because of your tax. But even if you didn't, if you're a small mall and you say we want to be net zero by 2030, that is then your internal. You can't claim that if you're not doing.
So I've always thought that even someone like Tesla comes and they say they are net zero.
So did you know Tesla got carbon credits for having electric vehicles?
I don't know that.
That is how their business works. So their baseline was 1 million diesel cars.
Yeah.
And because they're electric, they reduced that baseline. That's how it works.
That is so interesting.
How crazy is that?
So maybe an off-the-record question.
Yeah.
the indirect impact of mining and the batteries and everything that goes into the Tesla, like how is that accounted for within that whole picture?
The end-of-life emissions.
Yeah. But how do the people think about that? Or should they think about that?
I'm not 100% about that. It's a good question. I think... I feel like that's potentially like 2040's problem.
Okay. But at least for now we're making a difference. Change.
Yeah, and we're learning and we're figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and hopefully instilling this, like, it's a brain rewire. It's like when everyone went from horses to cars. It was like, oh, this is a car, what's going on? And now you're like, cut your diesel bucky loose and get this like electric
EV thing, yeah. Tesla's Cybertruck.
So it's a brain, I think we're in this shift, and hopefully it will stick.
Yeah. Make a change for that. So you mentioned the concept of RECs and Scope 2. Maybe just define that briefly.
Yeah, so REC is unlike a carbon credit where it can be a ton of carbon from anywhere, whether it's solar or forest or an ocean. A REC is specifically renewable energy. So it's not the same as a carbon offset, but it's a megawatt hour of energy produced, which is essentially a megawatt hour of dirty electricity that you didn't use.
So it's only from renewable sources?
Yeah, so solar, wind, hydro, but you cannot use a REC to offset your, as you say, like mining emissions. You could use it for your Scope 2 energy that you've purchased, and then you're like swapping. So you're saying we're using green energy.
Yes.
Because we've kind of traded this REC, and now you're technically using our dirty energy.
So if I was the mine, I would be doing a calculation saying this is my Scope 1 CO2 that I've emitted, and then I would do this is the electricity I've used that was not green, and that would be my Scope 2. And then I would buy RECs to supplement the one and buy carbon credits to supplement the other. Can you use carbon credits to supplement your Scope 2?
I think you can, but it would be quite an expensive and
exercise.
Bad option if I was advising you on what to do.
Because you can use RECs and it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah, you could. So if you had, like, if a business, say, was making their own carbon credits and wanted to use them for their Scope 2, I would advise them, like, sell those carbon credits for 3 times the price and then buy RECs. Unless you really want to do good.
Yeah.
Those are the people we want to work with.
But I mean, if you really want to do good, then you would rather fund the carbon credit project. So that makes sense.
Or donate them. Yeah. Just retire them for the sake of retiring them.
Yeah. Donate the carbon credits to social justice projects.
Exactly.
Who can then sell
to rural electrification.
Yes, make a real difference. So what would make a carbon credit high quality in today's market? Thinking about all these different standards, some of them more rigorous than others. Like what should, if I was a company wanting to buy them, what should I actually look for?
So there's so many answers. Or depending who you're speaking to, it can come down to like your personal value. So you as a buyer you have to buy 100 carbon credits. You might say, like, I really like forests, so I'm going to buy them from somewhere with forestry, or I'm really into like rural electrification, I'm going to buy them from there. So what's cool about it is it's a buyer has choices. There are limited carbon credits on the market, so that does obviously limit your options.
So there is actually a supply shortage.
Yeah, I think so. Of these legitimate high quality credits, they are difficult to get your hands on. But the first thing would be obviously the type of registry you're going with. So we've chatted about that. The second would be it's quite difficult as a buyer unless you have the knowledge to like dig into a carbon paper and see what happened. That's why you rely on like the stamp of the registry. So you don't have to do that admin and see who was the auditor, how many jobs did it create, how many tons of carbon, like what was the baseline. You are relying on the registry. So if you pick a good registry, there's another question of like which carbon credit project should make it to a registry or not. But the understanding is that once it's on a registry and it's been verified and audited, it is a high quality credit.
Okay. That makes sense. One thing I'm wondering about, you mentioned you were actually referring to this a bit earlier, and it probably comes down to the standards as well, is you can have two projects exactly the same, both make a difference in communities, both have all these boxes that they tick, and you can have two different registries, even comparing the same registry with the historical standard versus today.
Yeah.
And they will look at they'll have different check boxes. I'm going to refer to them as check boxes, but there's reasoning behind them.
Yes.
So you referred to stakeholder engagement. There's a concept that's floating around, which is confusing a lot of people around additionality.
Yes.
So would you mind, let's dig a bit into that black hole for a moment. Like, why are these things important? And, do we see some registries not looking at them and some are? Or maybe for some types of carbon credit projects, it's important, but for some types of projects, it's not.
Okay, I'm going to answer like slightly vaguely and tell a story. So 20 years ago, if you put solar on a factory in South Africa, you would let's make it 30.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't born yet, but let's make it 30. Like, that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
No one did that.
That would have been a revolution.
If you had done that, like, you are definitely reducing our emissions because no one's doing that. You wouldn't have done it without the credits. Awesome.
You've innovated some nice way to make a difference.
You're not taking the easy option. You're doing something like slightly more expensive for the better of the planet, and therefore you're reducing that emission. Today, in developed countries, carbon credits for solar are not a thing because a lot of countries require renewable energy. So like in Norway and Finland, I think they're like 90% renewable. They could even be 100%. I'm not sure.
So it's not a new thing. The whole country's there already.
Like, you're not reducing anything.
Okay.
In developing countries, we're in this little window where over the past few years, and obviously we've had the Eskom problem. So Eskom spurred on like a lot of solar installations. And at the time, I don't think everyone realized that carbon credits for solar was a thing. And now we're realizing it is, or it has been. And now the question comes in on, well, did you install that solar because you're getting cheaper electricity and not having load shedding and therefore it's business as usual? Or did you install it with carbon credits in mind because it's so expensive, you need those credits to make that reduction?
Okay,
so that's like an additionality question. Is it additional to the business case or to the baseline scenario?
So if I take it back to your original story on the refurbishment, I don't know what the right word is there. Restoration. That project would not have happened if the project would not have generated carbon credits.
Exactly.
So the carbon credits actually functioned as a gap filler to finance the change.
Yeah, it's a financing mechanism for carbon removals or reduction.
So in a developed country, typically that wouldn't be required. The financing gap wouldn't be there, and it would be common practice. I think the term used is common practice.
Yeah.
Like, it's common practice in the country for people to install solar or renewable energy, it's a majority of the company that runs on this.
Yeah.
Well, in South Africa, it's actually quite an interesting window because we've got the dirtiest grid of electricity in the world, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
It's pretty close.
We've got a large unemployed population. large rural communities, and then a lot of the community is not electrified.
Yeah.
And now we see the intent of carbon credits to be a financing mechanism to electrify or improve the quality of the grid, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
So the intent was that must happen, and that's where carbon credits would have assisted with that. Potentially being changed, whereas people already having installed solar, because there's a good business case. I mean, I heard someone last week saying if there's a 3-year payback period on their solar, that's a good business decision. It's a good investment case for it. So in those cases, carbon credits wasn't part of the thinking.
No.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying you need to start the project with the goal of carbon credits in mind to fill the gap for financing the project in order to make the change. If that's not the case, then your project would not qualify.
Yes, you need a lekker Excel sheet that says, hey, if I do this project without carbon credits, I'm really going to lose money. And, oh, look, if I do get credits for this, it makes it financially viable. We're going to go ahead. And what makes the most sense about that, if you didn't have the credits and it did make financial sense, you would do it anyway because it makes financial sense. Who doesn't want to like money?
Yeah. So the concept of carbon credits was actually not for that scenario.
No, the concept was that we really want to do this project. It's not financially viable. It will reduce carbon. With the carbon credits, we can make it happen and make a difference and keep the financing, hopefully, in this system of doing more of them.
Interesting. So we see in South Africa with, I think, a stronger implementation of our Carbon Tax Act. Over the last year or two, we've been actually seeing I'm going to refer to it as a gold rush.
Yeah, it's like the diamond rush. And we like back 100, 200 years ago. It's just
so everyone is running around and they're like, we can make money from this. So call it the corporate companies, or not even corporate, it can be small scale solar generators. Are thinking, hey, I can make a better return on investment from my solar. Not because I necessarily want to install more solar, it might be the case, but the intent of the solar installation wasn't that. It was either load shedding or whatever. So is the rule that like clear and strict, saying if this wasn't the intent and carbon credits wasn't the thing that made this possible, then it doesn't, like, is it that clear? Yeah.
So as you were saying earlier, the standards change. So a few years ago, solar in South Africa was automatically additional. So you didn't need to show if it was financially viable or not. They were just like, let's roll this out. We're going to make it automatically additional and hope that people are going to install them.
Yes.
Awesome.
So your barrier to entry was actually a lot lower.
So like gold standard, this was gold standard, I think, in like the 2010, somewhere in like 2012, 2013. And then it wasn't such a thing. And Eskom had a huge impact. I mean, I remember we got solar on our house because we were working from home and then there wouldn't be power for 6 hours. So financially, it was a no-brainer to put solar. Or you're a car manufacturing business, like, what are you going to do? You can't. You need to put on. So Eskom like kind of ruffled things a little bit, but maybe in a good way at the end of the day. But now, because it's so Vera and the standards like regularly have meetings and open discussions, and anyone can join them to talk about this and what are the trends and what is becoming more common and what's not. So with Vera, for example, there's literally a IRR, so the internal rate of return percentage, which is 10.37%. There's a sensitivity analysis, which is a little bit more complex, but if you're under that, and 10.37 is South Africa's, is it our interest rate? I'm not sure. It's the rate at which our businesses are inflation is supposed to go. So they're basically saying, if you're making less than this South African rate, we should compensate you so you can keep up. In other countries, the rate's like 20% or it's like -10. So it's
like your business shouldn't be left behind because you're doing this.
Exactly. It should stay, this should be financially viable for the lifetime of the project. If it's over, even though 10.4% might not be what some companies like good investment is or best case investment, that like they have to draw a line in the sand. So if you're under 10.37, and this is specifically for solar, I'm not 100% sure about what the additionality requirements are for other kinds of projects. So there is a hard line in the sand, and then there's a hard line about common practice, which is proving that this technology that you're getting credits for is not integrated into the geographic region.
Okay, and the companies who did do the solar projects back in 20 whatever, so the guys who actually developed those carbon credit projects where they didn't have to meet those additionality standards, they're actually allowed to continue for the lifetime of the carbon credit project, which is like 20, 21 years.
Yeah, it depends.
So the standard at which they were approved back then still applies up until the point where the project lifetime ends.
Yeah.
Any new project that gets registered needs to get registered under the new guidelines of the standards, even though it's the same standard or the same registry.
You could technically put a new project into an old group project and get the credits. But if that runs out in like 7 years, then you've got 7 years of credits. The business case is not very solid. It's better to put it into a new, if you need the credits for the business case, to put it into a new project which has 21 years. Because now when you're doing your financial analysis, you only have 7 years to make some money back. But if you do a new project, it's 21. And the reason for those years is that they put that deadline so that in 100 years, the solar site won't be there. Think of it like a forest, or think of a better example that you're not like making money from something that is now old technology that's been replaced by something more efficient.
And that wasn't the goal, right? The goal wasn't for you to become rich from it. It was to actually make a difference. So the forest example is great. There's a saturation point where you've now made the difference.
Exactly.
Now this thing becomes self-sustainable and you no longer need the carbon financing to maintain it.
Forests will always... So like, just fun fact, for example, Table Mountain can never be registered for carbon credits because legally it has to be protected. So it's the same as like the solar thing in Norway, where if something has to happen legally, so like a game park like Kruger, you cannot get carbon credits for because it would have happened anyway. No one's going to all of a sudden like turn Table Mountain into not a protected area.
Wow, that makes
it makes sense when you actually think about it.
So I'm thinking about the solar market in South Africa, and I'm going to make a wild assumption and say like, let's say 90 to 95% of solar installed, at least small scale. I can't speak for large scale, like IPP level projects. The intent probably, at least based on, this is only my own opinion and my own experience in conversation with many of these developers, has been, hey, we want to make a business out of this. We're going to sell carbon, not carbon credits, we're going to sell the solar, we're going to build the solar or run our farm from the solar. And now they're hearing about this concept of carbon credits. And they're like, hey, maybe we can make some more money out of this. But the money is going to go back to them at the end of the day. So, I mean, how do you think that's okay? Not okay? How do you practically think about that type of carbon credit inclusion in a new standard project?
I think that the standards are there for a reason, and that if you follow their rules, it will clearly tell you whether it shouldn't be or not. There's obviously personal opinions, and you can debate all day about, the IRR and additionality and all of these things. But at the end of the day, if there's no standard that everyone follows, how do you measure this? What is the point? So in certain cases, there are some things like very innovative. So when you have like PPAs, and maybe businesses are installing these, as you say, like bigger installations that wouldn't otherwise have been affordable, then I do believe there's a case. It depends on the numbers. Like you can't just guesstimate. But the small stuff, if there's something innovative, like, doing like a whole, a massive complex or a whole city, and it really costs a lot to do, that could be a really interesting case. But I'll use me with my house as the example. Don't you have solar?
No.
Oh, you don't? Behind us. Why is that? Too expensive? Because Eskom's working.
I'm renting.
I see. So like for us, I'm getting so many benefits from my solar and I'm not making a loss. I think it's been paid back, that a carbon credit would feel like cheating to me. So now I'm telling some guy, it's okay to emit because I put solar on my house 5 years ago so I could work from home. Like, nah, what? Why? The individual small scale house level does not make sense unless for some reason you had a really inefficient installer that like did something crazy that costed a lot of money, but then you're going to maybe get like 10 Rand a month or like 100 Rand a month from credits or what. Like the difference isn't a lot. But if you're part of like a group of innovative things, which you would know from the beginning, you can't decide 3 years later, I'd like to be part of your innovative group. No,
Because it wasn't part of your investment decision.
No,
right?
it wasn't. You started by yourself, you must end by yourself. If today you were like, I want solar on my roof and I can't really afford it, and let's get a bunch of innovative people together and make enough kilowatts to make this a project, I think there could be some
So for
reasoning.
like future projects?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, for future projects, because then you can sit and actually see the numbers and make a decision. But the gold rush for solar is something to be skeptical about. And I do think there's a lot of questions which people have very different answers to.
So maybe before we jump into the next line of questioning, what other tick boxes are there? So I'm going to just keep referring to tick boxes. So you've got additionality. So I need to show that this is actually making a difference over and above me having renewable energy or whatever project is you want to work with. There is the investment analysis thing you mentioned.
Same as additional, it falls under
additionality. You mentioned stakeholder engagement. So to quickly define that.
So stakeholder engagement, Vera is very strict on that. I think gold standard isn't as strict, but it's basically saying that like the guy who put solar on my roof could be claiming my credits without me knowing. Is that ethical? Is it right? What if I also want to claim credits from a roof and now we're double counting? So stakeholder engagement in terms of solar, and it's very deep when you get to forests and people living off the land and their ancestors and whatever. With solar, it's much clearer because we have numbers, we have data.
Yes.
So it's whoever's consuming the energy, whoever owns the green assets, and in most cases, they want to know about whoever installed it. So if you're an EPC, you could be umbrellaing every site you've ever installed and try and claim credits, while the device owner is also claiming credits and the person using the energy is claiming credits.
Okay, wow.
So stakeholder engagement is like a foolproof way of showing, firstly, no double counting, and secondly, that like everyone is okay with what's going on.
So one of the important things you mentioned on stakeholder engagement now, you actually used the term double counting. Do you mind defining that briefly?
So double counting is where you count 2 tons of carbon instead of 1. So as I said, you can have a project, and it also, another example is RECs. So you might be claiming carbon credits from a site and also claiming RECs. You shouldn't be allowed to do that, but that would be double. So counting more than what's actually happened, it's a massive problem. And that's where the ownership of the green assets has to be clearly defined. There are some really innovative ways to test this. So like Fuel Search, we have the blockchain where you can track where things came from, what day, like how many hours, what it's worth. So we are, I think, catching up to where we need to be with double counting, but it is something to look out for, especially when you're like developing projects and buying credit. Buying credits, not so much. It'll be difficult for you to know.
So what's interesting for me is that it's actually possible for one credit to be reported on or retired by multiple different companies. And one thing that I've seen there is some companies, so if I've got solar on my roof, it is possible for me to report on the fact that I'm green without getting carbon credits or RECs, because I can actually do it. I can show I've been using electricity. It's part of my own internal reporting standard.
Okay, yeah.
And I can get an auditor to come and check that. But what the auditor does not know is whether or not I've sold the carbon credits or the RECs to someone else unless I've actually issued them.
Exactly.
So if I didn't issue them, then it's possible for the landlord of the building or the installer to issue them without me knowing, or potentially it's part of the contract that I've signed but I didn't know. Now I'm reporting on it, but I'm not actually using the credits to do that because I think it's just me using it. And they haven't engaged with me as a stakeholder in the building, and now they're actually getting credits for it, and then they're selling that off. And that's what double counting is.
There's also what bothers me. It's my own problem. Sometimes people are trying to register their sites for carbon credits, but they also want to claim that they're green. So say a mall will say, we're a green mall, we use renewable energy, but they want to claim credits and sell those credits for money and still claim you're green. So if you sell a carbon credit, you're taking that carbon that you avoided and you're passing it on. You're no longer using, or you didn't use, so say you get your 5 years worth of carbon credits, you can no longer claim in your ESG that we use green energy because you sold that asset. If you get carbon credits and retire it, you can legitimately claim all of that. But lots of people say, oh, I want the carbon credits. And then during stakeholder engagement, you have to tell people this is not a green building anymore because we're selling credits. And people get very upset. And that needs to be out there.
So I think especially if you're a landlord, I think it's easier for this to happen because depending on the type of, let's say it's a listed company in your building.
Yeah.
And they need to do reporting. And this is an easy place where this double counting thing can happen. And you can avoid that either as the tenant or as the landlord, by actually going through a certification process, whether it's REX carbon credits.
Yeah.
And we can discuss which one would be better in all of that detail. But actually getting the certificate saying, okay, I actually was the one that used this. And that removes the possibility of the landlord or the tenant, in whatever example, also doing the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it gives you legitimacy, but there's things to watch out for. And that's also why it's important you have people who know how the market works to figure this out, because it's complex, but it's a reality.
When we saw the solar market boom, every single person became a solar installer.
Yes, even my stepdad, like all of a sudden just
did solar.
Became a solar.
Because it was a money-making opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think, especially South Africans, I think we're entrepreneurial and we see opportunities to make money. I mean, that's part of our culture, and I love that about us. And I see a similar thing happening in the carbon industry. Because there's now this opportunity, every single person becomes an expert.
Yes. Especially ChatGPT.
Yeah. AI-driven experts in this market. I mean, if I was a company, how do I decide which potential, cowboy I go to, or how do I decide on a carbon consultant in this stage? So I mean, you guys focus on in Delta Carbon strategies, not actually project development as well, and Fuel Switch obviously as part of the product that through which we can make this available to the market. But how would they know you are the right fit for them and not company X, who might or might not be using all the principles that you've been referring to?
Well, the good news is there's some really good people who know what they are doing in the market. The downside is that there's also people trying to make a quick buck and they don't really care about you. Sorry. So I would avoid carbon cowboys. I would avoid anyone who doesn't consult you. Anyone who can't explain to you what's going on and the risks, and there are always risks. So if you have a conversation with someone who's like, it's guaranteed, there's no risks, there's something sketchy happening there. You should always be offered some sort of, as you say, consulting is consulting. It's not give me your details and I'll give you money. There's got to be some education. If they're not engaging, doing stakeholder engagement, it's a bit of a red flag. But it depends on who you are. So we have to define being a buyer and a seller, so a generator or an off-taker in terms of this. If you're a buyer, you obviously want someone to consult you to help you figure out what to buy and how much. That's a little bit of a different story. We do that, but because the credit is then already legitimate, you don't have to worry about all of the ethics that come into it.
Yes.
You just have to worry that your books align at the end of the day. If you're a seller, so if you have the green assets and now you're turning them into a certificate, I think we're in an interesting time where there's a lot, as I said, there's a lot of people who can help you, and you'll know by their qualifications. Someone has a degree in engineering or has done carbon consulting.
Because there's one thing about your background.
Yeah.
That stood out for me at least is science-based, right? So it's not it's math associated. There's actually a scientific approach to this. You understand it. I think that's one thing. Is I've heard a lot of misinformation in the market from really educated or even well-versed brands who are misinformed, and due to fault of no one. It's just there's so much information in the market, you don't know what to filter on, what you can or can't do with it, or what qualifies, doesn't qualify. So I think it's really looking for someone with a deep understanding of this, knowing the intricacies, the ins and the outs, and willing to say, hey, this is not possible, even though we can try and make money out of you, it's not going to work.
Yeah, the market's been kind of, as you said, this gold rush that's going on. The risk of that is that South Africa's reputation goes along with that. So if we register sites that potentially shouldn't have been registered or projects, it doesn't look good. And, the standards, they're standards, so they can change whenever they want. They could say next year, sorry, South Africa, we don't allow any solar ever again. That would really, and it would hurt the country. Not just the people trying to make the money and, our businesses, but it would really not benefit, because we really need this money for development, and we need these projects to happen and to become like independent in our own power and sustainable. So that's something to watch out for. If you see no risks, that's a red flag to me. There's not an easy answer to how to find a carbon consultant, whether you're in solar or forestry. I know there's some really awesome people out there. I would say if your reputation relies on it. So me, if I try and put my house in a carbon credit project and it fails, like, it's just sad for me. But if you are like a retail, or you're
RE100 listed.
Real estate business, and you have ESG reports, you don't want in 5 years to come back and say all our reports from 2025 onwards are wrong because these carbon credits were redacted because of double counting, for example. So someone who's going to be transparent with you, give you multiple options. There's always another option. That's the way to find someone trustworthy, and shop around. Like, it's like buying shoes. You have to try on a few.
I appreciate the fact that I like the comment that, people who want to educate you actually help you understand the market. I think that's a very valuable thing. Something that's came up quite a few times in the conversation now is also RECs. So, looking at these guys they've got the solar, if they can't get carbon credits from it, can they still make some form of revenue? So the thinking behind RECs is, I want to make a difference, and more, I've generated green energy that was pushed into the grid, or I've generated renewable energy and I'm connected to the grid, even though that didn't get pushed into the grid. From an accounting point of view, I can trade my greenness of my electricity for someone else's. So you touched on this earlier as well, but like the carbon credits, if I sell the carbon credits, I can no longer say I'm green. And I want to take it even further. Like, when I own the carbon credits, I'm not green. It's when I retire them that I'm actually green. Because as long as I hold them without retiring them, I can sell them. So I can't report up until the point of retiring them, which is the same. So how can companies potentially benefit from something like RECs? And what are the standards and how stringent is it to actually get that as a call it an asset class versus a carbon credit if I'm a farmer and my carbon credit project no longer applies?
Yeah, I love RECs. I didn't know about them like a year ago, but RECs are awesome, renewable energy certificates, because there's so much green energy that's being generated that isn't measured. So like, if you have a house off the grid and you're generating solar, you don't have to do it. You're doing it because you're not connected, but you could still, as you say, label that and like get a certificate of it being green energy and help someone else meet their scope 2 goals. There's 2 registries in South Africa, IREX and ZAREX, and you can register your sites there. It's a lot easier than carbon credits. You're not saying, I removed this carbon from the atmosphere, because quite a big claim to say, like, I'm taking this carbon, I'm stopping carbon. Like, it's a really big deal. It's very serious, very serious. But RECs, it's tangible, it's renewable energy for energy. It's an energy-based thing. It's not a carbon-based thing.
It's a lot easier to account for. You've got kilowatt-hour data coming from the inverter.
There's no like baseline and additionality. It's, here's how many kilowatt hours I generated. Now I get money per megawatt hour, and you can go back a year. There's no time limit. Like, there's none of the standards where you can't go back more than 2 years. Direct's go on forever.
As long as your facility exists. You can generate RECs. So probably the amount you get will decline over time, just because your facility generates less and less over time.
Yeah, so that's a really good option. And there's so much unaccounted for green energy happening or being generated that we should be accounting for. Also just for our general, won't badmouth anyone.
So, in one story I've heard about RECs, which was really helpful for me to understand the concept, was if you think about the electricity grid as this dam, and there's different rivers of water coming into the dam, you can like compare the rivers to different sources of energy. It's not possible to actually track every single drop of water, which would then be an electron in the grid. So when someone takes a bucket and scoops water out of the dam, you have no idea, which river did that water come from.
Is it the dirty river? Is it the clean river?
Yeah, exactly. Is it Eskom's, coal fire powered, or is it someone's renewable energy facility, solar farm, or hydro dam, or whatever? Then the REC is a way to certify a tranche of that electricity, or those electrons. So it's like every megawatt hour is a certified tranche coming from river number A, right? So solar farm X generated this megawatt hour between these hours. Let's say 9:30 in the morning to 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And then that now gets certified, gets audited by a registry. Same way the carbon credits have registries, regs also have them to govern the validity of this, so people don't do fake renewable energy claims, and then so it's the same old double counting issue. And then when I buy and retire a reg, similarly to a carbon credit to offset a scope of emission, which would in this case just be scope 2 as you referred to earlier, then I would actually be claiming that tranche of electricity that went into the grid was the tranche that I've used.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one because the grid actually doesn't have the ability to store energy the same way that with carbon, carbon gets stored in different carbon stores. So it should ideally be in the same time span as I've used the electricity. I've now bought RECs from electricity generated in that same half-hour interval. I mean, instantaneous would be the best, but the market's not that mature. So I actually want to match my generation and consumption, which is a difficult thing to do because the level of granularity of information available on these RECs with standards today is a lot less. So it's a lot more difficult to get that. And there's quite a lot barrier to entry to participate in these markets. So because people don't understand them.
Yeah.
So if I was a company and I need to now get these RECs potentially, what would I do? Like, where do I go? Do I come to you? How do I register them? Like, am I guaranteed? Is this one of those like, hey, give me your data and I'll give you money type of things?
Yeah, it is. Isn't it?
Yeah,
it is. Within there's obviously like
limitations.
We need to send a photo and we need access to your platform and
certain types of
there's certain things, but
place,
like if you have solar that is working, you should have those docs. It's very different to the carbon credit.
Yes.
No decisions needed to be made. Doesn't matter who you are, you can do it. The size, obviously, like pricing in terms of registering things, that's the barrier, is how much it costs to register. Who knows? Maybe someone will take away that barrier one day. We'll have to see. But I would probably go, hey, I have a site. How do I register it for REC? No, there's a, you can either go like directly to the registry and do it with them, which can be like slightly administratively frustrating, or you find someone like yourself, like Fuel Switch, who literally does it for you, and also has somewhere to like send them if you want to get rid of them and sell them. Yeah. That's such a big thing, is when you have these green attributes or carbon credits and RECs, it's really nice if you get them, but like,
what do you do with them now?
Someone who are you going to sell them to? It's not that easy to find someone.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've seen on the REC and the carbon credit side, people who've ended up with some form of these credits, RECs or carbon credits, and then asking us, hey, do you guys have a market for me to sell this?
There was like sustainable grazing and land management, and they had all these carbon credits. And they have like 400,000, I want to say 400,000 carbon credits.
Yeah.
And they were like, hey, wait. Like we went through all this effort to get them, and now we don't know what to do with them.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So something I've seen in the market, which was quite shocking to me originally, a few years ago when we started with this whole concept of creating a willing buyer, willing seller marketplace and assisting people to actually get the credits. I think that's the one difficult part, which is a barrier to entry, is people actually not knowing how to get it, is the quite crazy brokerage percentages that companies take. Like I've seen upwards of like 15 to even 70%, like 70, of the proceeds not going to the generator or the project itself, actually going to the brokers.
Yeah, that's a lot. And it is like, listen, think for a second that it's not a lot of work. The reason like carbon credits are so valuable is because they are legitimate and a lot of work goes into it. Lots of people need to be flown places and audited and all of that. But that 70% is a lot. RECs, is it the same? RECs is also so much.
So, I mean, typically we would see probably closer to, let's say, I've heard of examples of 15 to 50.
Okay.
But it's probably a bit less than the 70. So carbon credits is very high, but there's less people brokering RECs just because the value of it was lower.
Yes, it's a volume thing, and it's also if your cost is really low to register your site, everything you make is now like some extra revenue, or you can keep the RECs for yourself and retire them. And so I think that's a major bottleneck, is the cost of registration for RECs. And I mean, we've seen Fuel Switches is removing one of the barriers of like finding buyers and linking buyers and sellers together.
I've seen interesting use cases, I mean, there's been some things in the news with us, with Growth Point Properties, seeing the REC as a mechanism to actually increase your value offering to your client base.
Okay.
You know, so I mean, we're working with multiple different real estate investment trusts, and I'm using them as an example because it's the most public one to date, of how they've used this instrument or this asset class to actually increase the value add that they can give to their clients, making their clients participate in the green economy,
Okay.
not necessarily just themselves. And the way that they're showing that they're not double counting is they're actually giving the certificate to their client.
Okay, so they're giving the client the certificate to do what they want with it, not keeping it for themselves.
I mean, how they sell that, I'm not going to sure what the commercial terms around that is, but the client ends up with the certificate.
Okay.
And then they can decide.
Tenant. So they've used our green electricity. We're now giving you this certificate to either like put on your website and say, look,
I'm green.
We're green, or to sell and have an office party.
Yeah, exactly. Take your people out for lunch. Your financial year end. So I mean, there's opportunities in actually using this as a new way of doing business and a new way of adding value. So yeah, I've just seen that's been quite an interesting thing. I think maybe you can speak to this as well. The same additionality. Stakeholder engagement concept applies, right? The whole double counting thing still.
Yeah, for REX.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. So when you register REX, you need proof of ownership and you sign a declaration saying who's the owner of the REC, and that basically says you cannot register it again. It is a bit, I mean, electrons are an abstract thing, can't really see them, but because we have metering and monitoring platforms, that is really like the foundation of renewable energy green attributes because it is data, it's maths. We can actually measure things. So REC double counting is also, depending on who owns it and who's consuming it, can be a big problem. Like if the renewable energy is being like accounted for Eskom as renewable energy, and they're counting it as green energy, and then you're also getting RECs. I think that's
a double count.
There are problems to look out for.
I think that comes down to, so there's a term in our industry called a PPA, a power purchase agreement. So typically that should be a clause in your PPA.
Yes, who owns the right? It's usually the owner of the device who is the installer.
Yeah, or as part of your offtake agreement, if you sign a PPA, I'm going to buy electricity from you, Mr. Big Solar Farm owner, then I can include that, like I buy the rights to the I think the term is renewable energy attributes.
Yes.
Which can then either be for carbon credits or RECs, depending on all the boxes.
So you must check these things when you sign your EPC solar installation. You must check who's
owning that.
Who's owning, and if it's not there, like it should be there.
Yeah, then it should be the person who paid for the building of the facility itself.
It can be anyone as long as you agree on it.
Yeah.
So, like I think if you have a power purchase agreement and you want the green attributes, you can say like, look.
I want it.
Maybe it's a bargaining tool, but I think there's some cool arrangements where, or what I would think would be really nice in the future is when you do a PPA, there's like, oh, we can only install this because of carbon credits.
Yeah.
But like we're both in on it, so let's split it.
Yes, both can benefit.
And all those savings that we get, like we'll deduct the price of electricity per month and you get some credits to do what you want, and we'll reduce our installation costs because we're getting. And that is the right way to be doing. You should be making electricity affordable and accessible and not double counting or claiming things that don't exist.
So an interesting project that we've gone through, I mean, you've done all the work on that, is actually we've gone through the process of trying to register our own solar carbon credit projects.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say this because it's public knowledge, available, open source now. So
I'll go check it out on there.
So, I mean, we've gone through the exercise of trying to register a lot of these sites for carbon credits. And in that process, we've learned a lot of what is possible, what's not possible. We potentially can see the opportunity of this whole, I think you were referring to common practice earlier.
Yeah.
There's opportunity there, and there's a bunch of work where we can still try and get it. But I mean, even that's got risk and there's no guarantee there.
Yeah.
And then we've seen that many of these projects, it doesn't apply because the standard, is strict and we don't have the answers to all of that. So you've actually been speaking about converting one of those projects to rural electrification.
Yes.
Would you mind sharing some of the heart behind that and the idea?
Yeah, well, I really, as much as I love corporate sustainability, because that's like we need to do these big things.
That's the 20%, right?
That's the 20%. We need to get the big guys on board. We need to help them a lot of people don't know what's going on. That is the main goal to sustainable futures and combating climate change. But on the other side is we can't let those that are already unprivileged or underprivileged fall behind when we're like building green cities and these like eco buildings when we're at the GBCSA conference, like all designed nicely for your mental health.
Yeah.
And it's really nice for the people that live there. But what about the guys that don't?
Yeah.
And don't have access, don't have the investment to start a carbon credit project? So we had the common practice and some additionality queries ourselves as we've been going through the process. And we realized that there's a gap where how can solar be used and how can carbon credits fund solar projects that wouldn't have happened? So any of the big case, like building a huge field of solar, and that's very nice, but you might create jobs, but you're not creating like a long-term community impact. Then everywhere, South African, you listen to this, we're faced with the challenges of being a developing country every day. And I'm not sure what the percentage is, but so many people don't have access to electricity. It's like a foundational human right to have access to these things.
And I think like there's been some public comments around our government's like ability, not just ability, but I think also like, let's refer to its ability and intent to keep investing into these communities.
Exactly. And as they grow.
And it's not financially feasible for them to do that because the amount of electricity used isn't covering the expense of the infrastructure being put up.
And it's admin. Like things take work, things take effort. Someone has to design it. So anyways, the project that we're working on, and we have a pilot project in George, is rural electrification. It's rural electrification, but it should be like rural/township electrification. It's basically people that don't have formal grid access. So it could be somewhere where there is like a power line, but because you don't have an electricity box or you're not signed up to be part of the grid, you maybe illegally connect, which has its own host of problems.
Yes.
Or you're literally in the middle of nowhere where there is no electricity. So those are two like groups we can work on for this project. But what happens is there's an initial investment from a really nice person who needs to invest in developing countries, and they set up a mini grid. So a mini grid is like 20 to 50 panels, and it kind of looks like a carport. So the boxes will be, all the electrical solar box will be underneath, and then it's kind of like a carport, and it will connect like 10 to 20 houses or power to 10 to 20 houses. And each of those houses has a little box, and it's like red light, green light, orange light, how much do you have left? And they pay minimal fees. So it's not even
fees,
so it's not, they don't pay as much as they do to Eskom, but they're paying a little bit. So it's worth it to them. They didn't have to pay 300,000 Rand to install the thing.
Yes.
But what's really cool about it is because it wouldn't have happened without that external funding and without carbon credits, it's most definitely additional in terms of an investment, and it's not common practice. Like, how many townships in South Africa have mini grids? I don't know, maybe like the odd solar panel here or there that's powering your charger, but it's really not infiltrated. And I mean, we don't even have to talk about the sustainable development goals it meets, like education, lights for studying at night, health, you can power your microwave, give your baby
affordable energy,
milk. Access to get on the personal level. So that is really awesome. And then the carbon credits from that fund like the maintenance. So we can't cover the maintenance cost with those small electricity amounts, but someone has to clean it, someone has to check, you have to put a big like a small fence around it. So that's where we come to like circular economies, which is where the renewable energy and carbon credits fits into that bigger circular economy picture, where there's like an initial investment, the carbon credits keep it going, and hopefully those carbon credits can like start new projects, and then they just become this rolling effect. So that is something we're working on. We have the pilot site, and we're busy registering that for carbon credits. Obviously, we get a very small amount from that, but it's also a proof of concept. And we have a few other sites, a few other areas in South Africa that are in line. So that's really exciting.
The great thing about these rural electrification projects is actually the fact that it's aimed at making a difference. What I actually like about it is you're actually building a solar farm in a rural community. And I think one exciting thing to just mention is, our project initiative. It's actually been approved by the presidency under their jet funding platform. I mean, we're obviously inviting anyone to participate in that in ways in which we can expand that. Maybe like as we conclude the conversation, I would like to get your insights on where do you think the market's going to go. Not necessarily are carbon credits going to become more valuable, less valuable, because we know there's like carbon tax pricing out there already. But like, how do you see technology and the verification of carbon credits changing over time? I think you were referring to an example earlier of density of forests. And I think that was an awesome example. Like, how do you see that type of thing changing, bringing down the barriers to entry, hopefully, for these carbon credit project registrations?
So for carbon credits, there's two sides. The one is that while technology is very useful in some ways, is that I don't think we'll ever remove the big challenge comes with like, say, the auditing side, where someone literally has to come and see what's going on site. Like an AI bot can't walk into a site and check what's going on. Like that doesn't, and the other side of it is that because tech is getting good, you almost need to do more checks to check that stuff's legitimate.
Not fraudulent.
So with tech, you can, the data management is a lot easier, like grouping things together is a lot easier, tracking the actual credits on the blockchain becomes possible. But with registering projects, there will always be a manual side to checking the project is legitimate. And I think if anyone is saying otherwise, then they are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. There's no way you can just dump stuff into your AI, whatever, and it tells you whether stakeholder engagement has been done. Like that there's still a human side. We're not trying to take the human out of our climate change problem. But in terms of the actual data management and the smart things we can do to obtain it.
Yes.
So getting the consumers, making it less administratively intensive for the generators is entirely possible. It means we still have lots of admin to do, but luckily we can take that away from you. And the trading, I think that's really where the importance of the tech's going to be. I think we're going to see like stable volumes, probably high volumes of credits. And I think there's going to be more buyers. Like we're developing, so we're never going to stop generating emissions. Hopefully we emit a lot more because it means we're developing, but we have these cool projects in South Africa to offset our big emitters. Yeah. So tech then linking buyers and sellers and tracking where these things come from. And this becomes a reality, smart cities, we are living in the future, and this is how these things are going to happen. I think companies are going to become a lot more strict of where they get their credits from and their reputations around when you have choices, what choice are you making?
Yeah. You mentioned something a bit earlier, which I thought was interesting, is that the cost barrier to entry for small scale facilities coming down. Do you think there's something that will happen there in the next few years?
Like for RECs?
Oh, RECs carbon credits.
Carbon credits. Yeah, I think so. I think
especially with solar, I think because you've got such a easily measurable output, right?
Yes.
It's just kilowatt hour data.
Yeah. So it's, as you're saying, like you don't have to, because your meter or your device is calibrated and has a specific set of like requirements and it meets all of these. What's to say that your SunSync battery or inverter is different from mine? Why do they both need to be checked?
Yeah.
Why can't we check one and then assume all of them are the same? I think that is possible. I think the carbon credit standards are too strict for that because someone physically needs to go, an auditor goes through every single document. So it needs to be accessible. Like if we're doing that on our side, we need to make sure that the auditors can do the same process or do it manually if they want. So you'll never cut that out. But for something like RECs, where there isn't there is a manual process, but they're not checking like emails and meeting minutes and financial investments where
like 3 years ago.
Exactly, where you literally need to understand what's going on, where it's just document checking. I think there's a very interesting case for registering solar sites that are too small for current registries. And there's obviously a lot of volume of household solar that isn't being accounted for.
And I mean, just in our city, I think our municipality has lost a lot of income over the last few years because everyone is converted to solar, and that's part of the income. So I think there's a good use case for that. Maybe as a final question, Inka, where do you see yourself playing in this carbon space? Out of interest, like if you had to like quick check 10 years from now, I know you like the science, the maths, and like, do you see yourself playing a role in like trying to push policy or to like on the auditing side of things? Is it within the carbon strategy and consulting? Like, where do you think you'll head towards as this market matures and as you grow further into this industry?
It's a great question. I'm still figuring that out. I was very shocked that in like the time that I've been in this industry, how much more I know than people who have been here for like years. And I don't know if that's because I have my fingers in like all of these other pies and I'm putting together this bigger picture than just solar equals money. Because that's, so I do think the consulting side, the education to the people who are investing and making these decisions. Carbon project development is when it's a good project, it can be really nice. I enjoy like informing and educating people. So the stakeholder stuff really interests me. Honestly, the rural electrification is probably the closest to my heart in terms of, as I was talking in the beginning about like community benefits, because really those, and my report on nature-based solutions in Africa is like, as the world speeds ahead and we have all this tech and, you know, we live these great lives, I need to make sure that people don't get left behind. And I'd like to play a role in integrating that into like when you do have carbon responsibilities or you have, you know, a carbon tax or you need to meet a certain, why are we not also having these like social goals? So if you need to spend this much on carbon credits, maybe a percentage of those actually need to go to the people who really need them and uplifting them. So I think there's a space for that. And also just, I think I would have liked 10 years ago for someone to tell me like the world isn't ending, like you're not going to burst into flames like tomorrow. I genuinely thought we would. Didn't think I'd be like 10 years from now. But now the tech space and the innovative space, tech and climate change are so interrelated that, guiding the next generation. It's so funny that I'm saying that because I feel like I've always been like the next generation to be like, there's so much opportunity, don't lose hope, and like anyone can make a difference. Doesn't matter how big you are.
That is an awesome answer. I think we need to quote that in some movie somewhere.
Put on a t-shirt.
Inka, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. I think it's good, valuable insights. I'm interested to see what happens in the South African market, at least over the next year or two. I think it's going to be major shifts and maybe some challenges in the carbon market, depending on how these projects go. I think especially on the solar side. But I think there's an opportunity for us to make a real difference. And I'm hopeful that the industry would be aligned to the intent of these carbon initiatives and carbon finance. And, you know, together we actually take it forward in the way it was meant to.
Yeah, exactly.
Not just for making money, even though it can be part of it. It's not supposed to be
That's how the world works.
So appreciate the time and the insights.
Cool.
Thank you.